I want to break in here. I just saw a report from our pal Ariel Helwani over at ESPN, and multiple sources telling him that there's a proposed deal on the table between the UFC and one championship, a trade, Shaun.
What?
A trade.
Okay.
Demetrious Johnson going to one championship, Ben Askren going to the UFC. A trade. How about this? And that's what sources are telling Ariel Helwani, not finalized just yet, but discussed at length and is categorized by multiple sources as close to getting done. All parties involved are hopeful it will be finalized soon.
It is very interesting to me, man. I mean, this is the idea of a trade. I mean, the idea just generally, let's first start there, right? The idea of a trade in mixed martial arts. Can you remember this ever happening? Because I can't think of one instance of such a high profile type of situation like this, of effectively trading the rights for somebody. We were just talking about this 2 weeks ago on the show. We were asked about rumblings of the flyweight division, whether it was imminent that is going to go away, losing a man who has basically been the linchpin of that division since its inception. And not only losing him, but basically giving him away. That signals bad signs to me about the health of the 125-pound division. The UFC is interested in it moving forward. Does it not for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, this probably means that the 125 division is kind of on borrowed time right now. I don't know if it'll even be a thing in a few months, which is unfortunate. But we'll wait and see. We'll see how it plays out. It's interesting to see where and what Demetrious Johnson does at one, and one is making moves. Eddie Alvarez signed last week. They're about to possibly get one of the best pound for pound. Look, he's one of the best pound for pound fighters of all time. And if this does hold up and this trade comes to fruition, as Ariel Helwani is reporting, one championship is going to have an elite pound for pound. He'll be the best fighter in one history if it does go through. So that's fascinating. And on the other side, you have Ben Askren coming into a welterweight division that is stacked. There are multiple interesting matchups for him. He wants to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. I mean, it's a fascinating move on both fronts.
The UFC historically is not a promotion that plays well with others. So their willingness to trade Demetrious Johnson, trade in this sense, what does that tell you about how they feel about Demetrious Johnson in general? It feels like they've been trying to get rid of this guy for a while, just in terms of, if you remember, I think it was last year when he had his whole basically giant feud with the UFC. And at the time, Ariel Helwani, who was with us, reported that there were like threats that the division could have been like taken over, just removed, taken out just as a bargaining play. Like, it feels like this has been in the works for a while.
Well, it just feels like they don't value him as a draw. And this is the WME IMG era, the Endeavor era. And they're looking at things that are going to make them money. And Demetrious Johnson, unfortunately, was never able to hook on with the fan base, with a big portion of the fan base. And you could say that's his fault. You can say that that's the UFC's fault. I think there's probably blame that can go all the way around for that situation. And what they're doing is essentially jettisoning what was probably somewhat of not expensive in the grand scheme of things, but maybe expensive for what they felt like they were getting back, the rate on investment, and bringing in Ben Askren, who maybe could be a draw. People are interested in Ben Askren. There's intrigue there. Certainly there's intrigue. And maybe they felt like the Demetrious Johnson ship has sailed with them. And maybe he wants the same thing. Maybe that's what he wants. I don't think he was all that happy with the UFC. He gets to go to one championship and fight for Matt Hume, his coach.
Also, I feel like the UFC's repeated insistence on making or wanting Henry Cejudo to immediately jump up to bantamweight. That's all we've heard of in terms of his next fight has been that bantamweight title fight. That's another signs on the wall, writings on the wall of what could be the fate of 125 pounds. So that would be unfortunate. But I will say, me and you, we've talked about this in past shows, one of the biggest hangups for making a 165-pound division for the UFC has been that they can't add another division at this point. They just are not. There are not enough shows to be able to roster that many fighters and give those fighters the required fights that they need. If you lose 125, opportunities there to make 165 if somebody ever wants to. I know Dana White is very resistant against that, but the opportunity would then be there.
if losing 125 means we get 165, that could be a net win. It could be a net win. I don't know what they're going to do yet with 165 and 170 and 155, and it seems like a little bit of a jumble, but it could 165 will certainly be a bigger money drawing division. That championship, that title will be a pay-per-view headliner type title, whereas 125 has not really been that type of draw.
Ben Askren now, with him going to the UFC, I think this is something we'll address later on in the show too, but what kind of matchups could be available for him, man? He is a grappler's dream if you're looking for those type of matchups. If you could get him against GSP, Tyron Woodley, that they would never fight because he's effectively one of Tyron's coaches. But GSP, Habib, my goodness, man, there are so many interesting matchups for Ben Askren in the UFC, and he is a hell of a talker that can start himself some feuds in there if he wants to. This is something I've wanted to see for a long time, him in the UFC. If this is what it takes to get there, that would be something.